I found out my girlfriend has been hiding a massive secret from me. It started as an ordinary Saturday. The sun streamed through the blinds of our tiny apartment, and I could smell the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. Emily, my girlfriend of 3 years, was in the kitchen humming a tune that sounded vaguely familiar. She always hummed when she cooked, her way of focusing, she said. But something felt off. For weeks, I'd noticed small, strange behaviors. A late-night phone call she claimed was just a work thing. A locked drawer in her desk that wasn't there before. And then there was her sudden disinterest in plans for our trip to Europe. A trip she had been excited about for months. I told myself it was nothing. But today, the unease had festered into something I couldn't ignore. "Hey, Em," I called out, leaning against the doorway of the kitchen. She looked up from chopping vegetables, her smile warm but a little too perfect. "Yeah? Have you been okay? You've seemed distant lately." She paused, the knife hovering over the cutting board. Her eyes flickered for just a second, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. "I'm fine," she said, a little too quickly. "Just stressed about work, that's all." Work. It was always work. I nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but my gut told me otherwise. Later that evening, Emily said she had to run an errand. She kissed me on the cheek and left without giving me a chance to ask any questions. My heart pounded as I watched the door click shut behind her. This was my chance to figure out what was going on. I went straight to the locked drawer in her desk. I felt guilty for snooping, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know the truth. The lock was surprisingly simple. A small paperclip did the trick. The drawer creaked open, revealing a stack of papers, a few photographs, and a black leather notebook. The first photo caught my attention. It was of Emily, but she looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, and her eyes looked tired, haunted even. She was standing next to a man I didn't recognize, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. Flipping through the notebook, my hands trembled. It wasn't a diary. It was a list. Names, dates, and locations. Some of the names were crossed out. At the bottom of the page, written in bold letters, were the words, "Target eliminated." My breath caught in my throat. What was this? I barely had time to process what I'd found when I heard the front door open. I scrambled to put everything back, locking the drawer just as Emily walked in. She froze when she saw me standing there. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. "Em?" I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on? Who are you?" Her expression hardened. For the first time in 3 years, I couldn't read her. She didn't look scared or angry, just resigned. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to tell you," she said softly, setting down her bag. "But I guess I don't have a choice." We sat across from each other on the couch. Emily's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her usual composure slipping away. "My real name isn't Emily," she began. "It's Mia, and I work for an organization that deals with, let's say, sensitive matters." "What kind of sensitive matters?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then sighed. "I'm an operative. I take care of people who pose threats, serious threats, terrorists, war criminals, people like that." I stared at her, my mind racing. You're a spy? An assassin?" She flinched at the word, but nodded. "It's not like in the movies. It's not glamorous. It's messy and dangerous, and it's why I've kept it a secret. To protect you." My stomach churned. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was a killer. But there was something else gnawing at me. "And the man in the photo? Who is he?" Her face fell. "That's Daniel. He was my partner, both in the field and personally before I met you. He died on a mission 2 years ago." The weight of her words hit me like a truck. I didn't know what to say, how to feel. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from her as possible. But another part of me couldn't ignore the pain in her eyes, the vulnerability she rarely let anyone see. "I didn't want this life for us," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted something normal, something real, but the past has a way of catching up." We sat in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, I spoke. "What happens now?" Emily, Mia, looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "That's up to you. If you want to walk away, I won't stop you. But if you stay, you have to understand that this life comes with risks." I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one thing was clear. My life would never be the same. The next morning, the air in the apartment was heavy, like the calm before a storm. Emily, or Mia, as I was trying to get used to calling her, was quiet as she sipped her coffee, her eyes distant. I couldn't blame her. I hadn't said much since her confession the night before. How could I? Everything I thought I knew about her had been turned upside down. "I need to know," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Is anyone after you? After us?" She set her mug down slowly, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. "Not yet, but there's always a chance. When you leave this kind of work, people start asking questions. Some don't like the answers." The words hit me like a slap. "Wait, you're leaving? Just like that?" "I don't have a choice anymore," she said, her voice firm. "Now that you know, staying in the field puts you in danger. I can't let that happen." Her words were noble, but they didn't make me feel any safer. "What about the people you've worked with? Won't they come looking for you? For us?" She hesitated, her jaw tightening. "There's a protocol for this. I've already started the process. It's not perfect, but it's the best chance we have." The process turned out to be far more elaborate than I'd imagined. Over the next week, Mia made calls on burner phones, destroyed documents, and wiped every trace of her existence from our lives. I watched as she dismantled her own identity with the precision of someone who'd done it before. She'd even planned for me. A new phone, new bank accounts, a story about moving to a different city for work. It felt surreal, like we were characters in a spy movie. Except this wasn't fiction. It was my life now. One night, as we packed the last of our things, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice strained. "Didn't you trust me?" Mia stopped what she was doing and turned to face me. "Of course I trusted you. But the moment you knew, your life was no longer your own. You'd become a target. I didn't want that for you." I wanted to be angry, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting me too. The plan was simple. Leave in the middle of the night and drive to a safe house in the mountains. From there, we'd figure out our next steps, but nothing ever goes according to plan. We were about an hour into the drive, the highway empty except for the occasional truck, when Mia suddenly stiffened. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror, then to the side mirrors. "What is it?" I asked, my chest tightening. "We're being followed," she said, her voice low and calm. I glanced in the side mirror and saw the faint outline of a black SUV. Its headlights dimmed but not far behind. "Can we lose them?" "Not on the highway," she said, gripping the wheel tighter. "But I have a plan." She took the next exit, leading us onto a winding, desolate road surrounded by trees. The SUV followed, its intentions now unmistakable. Mia floored the gas, the car jolting forward as we sped down the narrow road. My heart pounded as the SUV gained on us, its engine roaring like a predator closing in on its prey. "Hold on," Mia said, her voice steady but tense. She yanked the wheel hard to the left, taking us down an even narrower dirt road. The tires skidded, gravel flying in all directions. I could barely see through the darkness, but Mia seemed to know exactly where she was going. The SUV wasn't as agile. It struggled to keep up, its headlights bouncing wildly as it hit every pothole and bump in the road. "Almost there," Mia muttered under her breath. "Almost where?" I asked, clutching the seat. She didn't answer. Instead, she slammed on the brakes, sending the car skidding to a stop. Out, she ordered. I barely had time to process before she was pulling me out of the car. She grabbed a bag from the back seat, then led me into the woods, her movements quick and deliberate. What about the car? I whispered, my voice shaking. They'll follow it, she said, pulling me deeper into the forest. But we won't be in it when they catch up. We ran for what felt like hours, the sound of our breathing and crunching leaves filling the night air. Finally, Mia stopped, crouching behind a fallen tree. Stay quiet, she whispered, her hand gripping something in the bag. Moments later, the SUV roared past on the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Mia waited until the sound faded before pulling out a small device from her bag. She pressed a button, and in the distance, I heard an explosion. They won't be following us anymore, she said, her voice calm but cold. We spent the rest of the night walking through the woods, eventually emerging onto another road where a car was waiting for us. As we drove away, I couldn't help but steal glances at Mia. She was calm, focused, as if this were just another day for her. Is this what life with you is going to be like? I asked, half joking, half serious. She looked at me, her expression softening. Not if I can help it. I didn't know if I believed her. But as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized something. I didn't care. I loved her. Secrets and all. The drive to the next safe house was quiet. Emily, I couldn't shake her original name from my mind, kept her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes scanning the road. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but I didn't know where to start. The night's chaos had left me with too many questions and not enough answers. Finally, she spoke. We'll be safe here for a few days. After that, we'll figure out what's next. What's next? I repeated, almost laughing. You mean after dodging assassins and blowing up cars? She shot me a quick glance, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. You're handling this better than I expected. Am I? I said, leaning back in my seat, because I feel like I'm one wrong move away from a panic attack. Her smile faded. I'm sorry, she said quietly. You didn't sign up for this. I sighed, staring out the window as trees blurred past us. No, I didn't. But here we are. The safe house was a small cabin tucked deep into the woods, miles from the nearest town. It looked abandoned from the outside. Faded paint, broken shutters. But inside, it was stocked with everything we needed. Food, medical supplies, weapons. Clearly, this wasn't her first time using it. As Mia busied herself checking the perimeter, I sat on the worn couch, trying to process everything. The woman I loved was part of some shadowy organization. She'd killed people, lied to me for years. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. If anything, I was more drawn to her than ever. Her strength, her resilience, her unwavering determination to keep me safe. When she finally sat down across from me, her expression was unreadable. We need to talk. Yeah, I said, folding my arms. No kidding. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I need to know if you're in this with me. If you stay, there's no going back. No normal life, no 9-to-5 job, no weekend getaways without looking over your shoulder. But if you want out, I'll make sure you're safe. You'll never hear from me again. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. The thought of never seeing her again made my chest tighten. But was I ready to live this life? To abandon everything I knew for a world of secrets and danger? I don't know, Mia, I admitted. This is a lot. She nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. Take the night to think about it. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with memories of our life together. The lazy Sunday mornings, the way she laughed at my terrible jokes, the way she held my hand when my dad was in the hospital. Was that all a lie? Or was that the real her? The person she wanted to be when she wasn't living this double life? Around midnight, I found her outside on the porch, staring up at the stars. She didn't turn when I approached, but I could tell she knew I was there. "You okay?" I asked. She sighed. "I don't think I've been okay in a long time." I sat down beside her, the cool night air biting at my skin. "Mia, or Emily, or whoever you are, I still love you." She turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. "But this is insane," I continued. "You've got enemies, people who want you dead. And now I'm a part of it too. How do you expect me to just be okay with that?" "I don't," she said softly. "But I'll do everything I can to protect you. That's all I can promise." I looked at her, really looked at her. The fear she tried to hide, the weight of everything she carried. And in that moment, I knew my decision. "I'm in," I said. Her breath hitched, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw tears in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted, taking her hand. "But I'm sure about you. And if this is what it takes to stay with you, then I'll figure it out." She smiled, a real, genuine smile, and squeezed my hand. "Thank you." The next morning, we started making plans. Mia taught me basic self-defense, how to handle a gun, how to spot a tail. It was overwhelming, but she was patient, guiding me through every step. As the days passed, we started to feel like a team. I learned to trust her instincts, and she started letting me in on things she'd never shared with anyone else. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was ours. One night, as we sat by the fire, she turned to me, her expression serious. "There's one more thing you need to know." I tensed. "What?" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "This is why I left the agency." I took the envelope, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a photograph of a little girl, no older than 6, with Mia's eyes and her smile. "Her name is Sophie," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's my daughter." The words knocked the breath out of me. "You have a daughter?" "She's been living with my sister," she said, her voice cracking. "It's the only way I could keep her safe. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep lying to her, pretending I didn't exist in her life. That's why I left." I stared at the photo, my heart racing. A daughter. Our lives had just become even more complicated. "Mia," I said, looking up at her. "We'll figure it out. Together." She smiled, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Secrets and all. The revelation about Sophie changed everything. It wasn't just about me and Mia anymore. There was a little girl out there, her daughter, depending on us to make things right. I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Mia to keep her distance all this time, knowing she had a child but staying away to keep her safe. It made me see her in a whole new light. Stronger, braver, and more selfless than I could have ever imagined. We spent the next few days planning our next move. Mia was adamant about retrieving Sophie and starting a new life together. But there was a problem. The agency. "They won't just let me walk away," she explained one evening, pacing back and forth in the cabin. "And if they find out I'm trying to take Sophie, they'll come after us with everything they've got." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "What are you saying? That we can't get her?" "No," Mia said firmly, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm saying we have to do it smart. And fast." The plan was risky, but Mia had thought of everything. Sophie was staying with Mia's sister, Sarah, in a small town about 3 hours away. The agency likely had someone keeping tabs on Sarah's house, waiting for Mia to slip up and show herself. If we were going to get Sophie, we'd need to outmaneuver them. "We'll go in at night," Mia said, tracing a map with her finger. "Sarah's house backs onto a wooded area. We'll park there, get Sophie, and be gone before they realize what's happening." "And if they're watching the house?" I asked. Mia's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we handle it. We left the cabin just after sunset, the tension in the car so thick it was hard to breathe. Mia was calm, her focus unshakable, but I could feel my nerves building with every mile. As we neared the town, she pulled off onto a dirt road, cutting the headlights and guiding the car into the woods. We parked under a canopy of trees, far enough from Sarah's house to avoid being seen. "Stay close to me," Mia whispered as we crept through the woods, the crunch of leaves underfoot sounding impossibly loud in the still night. The house came into view, a modest two-story with a small porch light glowing faintly. I could see the silhouette of a man sitting in a car across the street. One of the agency's watchers, no doubt. "They only sent one," Mia muttered, more to herself than to me. "That's good. We can work with that." Before I could ask what she meant, she handed me a small flashlight. "Go to the back door. Sarah knows we're coming, so she'll let you in. I'll deal with him." "What?" I hissed. "You're going to just—" "Trust me," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "I'll be fine. Just get Sophie and go." Reluctantly, I nodded and slipped around the side of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah was waiting at the back door, her face pale but determined. "She's upstairs," she whispered, ushering me inside. I found Sophie in her bedroom, curled up under a blanket with a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. She was even smaller in person than she looked in the photograph, her big eyes wide with curiosity as I entered. "Hi, Sophie," I said softly, kneeling down to her level. "I'm a friend of your mom's. We're going to take you somewhere safe." "Mommy," she whispered, sitting up. "She's outside," I assured her. "She'll be here soon." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, letting me wrap her in a blanket and carry her downstairs. As we stepped outside, I heard a commotion near the street. Raised voices, a scuffle. My stomach twisted as I realized Mia was still out there, dealing with the watcher. "Stay here," I told Sarah, handing Sophie to her before darting toward the front of the house. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Mia had the man pinned against the side of his car, his gun lying on the ground several feet away. Her expression was ice cold, her movements precise and controlled. "Tell your boss she's out," she growled, her voice low and dangerous. "And if I ever see you or anyone else near her again, you won't get off this easy." The man nodded frantically, his face pale. Mia released him and he scrambled into his car, peeling out of the driveway and disappearing into the night. When she turned and saw me standing there, her expression softened. "Is she okay?" I nodded. "She's with Sarah." "Good," she said, brushing past me. "Let's go." The drive back to the cabin was quiet, Sophie sleeping in the back seat while Mia kept her eyes on the road. When we arrived, she carried Sophie inside and tucked her into the bed we'd set up for her. As she sat down beside me on the couch, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "It's not over," she said quietly. "They'll come for us eventually, but for now she's safe. We're safe." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out. Together." She looked at me, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We didn't have all the answers, and the road ahead was uncertain, but we had each other, and that was enough to keep going. The first few days with Sophie at the cabin felt surreal. She was shy at first, sticking close to Mia and barely speaking to me, but that was understandable. Her world had just been upended, and now she was in a strange place with a man she didn't know. Mia, however, transformed around Sophie. Gone was the hardened, tactical version of her that I'd seen over the past few weeks. With Sophie, she was gentle, patient, and, dare I say, happy. She braided Sophie's hair in the mornings, read her bedtime stories at night, and always made sure her favorite stuffed rabbit was nearby. Watching them together, I realized just how much Mia had sacrificed to keep her daughter safe. Still, the shadow of the agency loomed over us. Mia worked tirelessly to ensure we stayed off their radar. She set up new escape plans, swapped out burner phones, and taught me how to defend myself in case things went south. What about Sophie? I asked one night as we sat on the porch, the faint sound of crickets filling the silence. Mia looked out into the woods, her expression distant. She'll never know this life, she said firmly. I'll make sure of it. How? I asked, genuinely curious. We can't just stay in this cabin forever. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. There's someone I used to trust, a handler who left the agency a few years ago. He might be able to help us disappear for good. Do you trust him? She hesitated, then nodded. I do. But if we reach out to him, it's a one-shot deal. No turning back. The next morning, Mia made the call. We used a burner phone and she spoke in cryptic phrases, careful not to reveal too much. We need an exit, she said at one point, her voice steady. 3 tickets, non-negotiable. When she hung up, she turned to me. He'll meet us in 3 days, but we'll have to move fast. If the agency catches wind of this. They won't, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. The next 3 days were tense. Mia prepped us for every possible scenario, packing go bags, rehearsing our escape route, and even drilling me on how to drive evasively if it came to that. Sophie seemed oblivious to the tension, happily playing with her stuffed rabbit and coloring with crayons Mia had found in the cabin. But on the night before we were set to leave, everything fell apart. It started with the sound of a car engine in the distance. Mia and I froze, exchanging a tense glance before she motioned for me to grab Sophie. Get her into the basement, she whispered, already moving toward the window to check outside. I scooped Sophie up, her sleepy protests muffled as I carried her downstairs and set her on the cot. Stay here, okay? I whispered. Don't come out until I say so. Her big eyes stared up at me, full of confusion. Is Mommy okay? She will be, I promised, forcing a smile. Just stay here. Upstairs, Mia had armed herself with a handgun, her face a mask of cold determination. There's a car parked at the end of the driveway, she said. I don't recognize it, but I'm not taking any chances. Do you think it's them? Could be, she said grimly. Stay here. If anything happens, you know what to do. Before I could argue, she slipped out the door, moving silently into the shadows. I stayed by the window, my heart hammering in my chest as I watched her approach the car. She moved like a ghost, her gun drawn, her eyes scanning every angle. But before she could reach the car, the headlights blazed to life and the engine roared. The car reversed at high speed, disappearing down the road as quickly as it had come. Mia stood there for a moment, her silhouette outlined by the moonlight before turning and walking back to the house. It was a warning, she said once we were inside, her voice tight with anger. They know we're here. Then we have to go, now, I said. She nodded, already grabbing the go bags. Wake Sophie. We leave in 5 minutes. The drive was tense, every pair of headlights in the distance feeling like a threat. We stuck to back roads, avoiding main highways and any place with cameras. Sophie, sensing the urgency, stayed quiet in the back seat, clutching her rabbit tightly. We arrived at the rendezvous point just before dawn, a deserted airstrip in the middle of nowhere. A small plane was waiting, its engine idling. A man stepped out as we approached, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. Mia tensed, her hand resting on her hip where I knew she'd hidden her gun. You're late, the man said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. We had a problem, Mia replied, her tone guarded. The man's eyes flicked to me, then to Sophie. This her? Mia nodded. He sighed, pulling out a folder from his bag. New identities, passports, birth certificates, everything you'll need. You're going to want to lie low for a while. And if they find us? Mia asked. They won't, he said firmly. Not if you follow my instructions. As the plane took off, I looked over at Mia, who was holding Sophie in her lap. For the first time in weeks, I saw a hint of relief in her eyes. Where are we going? I asked. Mia smiled faintly. somewhere they'll never find us. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was enough. As I looked out the window, the rising sun casting a golden glow over the horizon, I realized that this was our new beginning. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be safe, but we had each other. And for now, that was enough. The plane touched down in a remote coastal town just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air smelled of salt and rain, and the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the silence. It felt peaceful. Deceptively so. "This is it?" I asked, stepping off the plane and taking in the sight of the small airstrip surrounded by dense jungle and the faint outline of the ocean in the distance. Mia nodded, holding Sophie tightly as the little girl dozed against her shoulder. "For now. The handler said this place is off-grid. No electronic records, no eyes. We'll use it to regroup." Our contact handed Mia a set of keys to a beat-up old Jeep parked at the edge of the airstrip. "The house is stocked," he said, keeping his voice low. "Food supplies, a satellite phone. Only use it in an emergency." He glanced at me. "You two are smart to keep moving, but don't get comfortable. If the agency is serious about tracking you, this won't last forever." Mia gave him a curt nod. "Thank you." He tipped his hat, then turned and boarded the plane, leaving us alone as the engine roared back to life and the aircraft disappeared into the night. The house was a small, weathered bungalow perched on a hill overlooking the ocean. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with threadbare furniture. But it felt safe, at least for the moment. Sophie stirred as we carried her inside, her sleepy eyes blinking up at Mia. "Mommy, are we home?" Mia hesitated, then kissed her forehead. "For now, baby. Go back to sleep." After settling Sophie into one of the bedrooms, Mia and I sat in the living room, the weight of everything finally catching up to us. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we weren't saying. "We're not out of the woods," I finally said. Mia looked at me, her expression unreadable. "We never will be." "Not really." "That's a hell of a way to live." "It's the only way," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "As long as Sophie's safe, I don't care." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I realized just how much this life had cost her, not just in terms of danger and sacrifice, but in the emotional toll of constantly looking over her shoulder, of never truly being free. And now, I was a part of it too. The next few days passed quietly. Mia spent most of her time watching the perimeter, scanning for anything that seemed out of place, while I tried to keep Sophie occupied. We played games, read books, and walked along the beach, where she collected seashells and asked questions about the stars. One night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I found Mia sitting on the porch, staring out at the dark ocean. She had a faraway look in her eyes, as though she was seeing something I couldn't. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She nodded. "They won't stop. Not until they find us." "Then we keep running," I said. "We'll stay ahead of them." She turned to me, her eyes glistening. "You shouldn't have to live like this. You had a life before me. A normal one." I shook my head. "That life doesn't exist anymore. You and Sophie. You're my life now." Her hand reached for mine, and for a moment we sat in silence, the sound of the waves filling the space between us. But peace is fleeting in a life like ours. It started with a faint hum in the air, barely audible over the sound of the ocean. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but Mia stiffened beside me, her head snapping toward the horizon. "What is it?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood abruptly, her eyes scanning the dark sky. And then I saw it, a faint glimmer of lights moving in formation. "Drones," she said, her voice tight. "They found us." Panic surged through me. "What do we do?" Mia was already moving, her instincts kicking in. "Get Sophie, now." I bolted inside, my heart hammering as I scooped Sophie out of bed. "Sweetheart, we have to go," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She clung to me, still half asleep, as I grabbed the go bag Mia had packed earlier. By the time I got back outside, Mia was already in the Jeep, the engine running. "Get in," she shouted. I jumped into the passenger seat, cradling Sophie in my lap as Mia slammed her foot on the gas. The Jeep roared to life, tearing down the dirt road as the drones grew louder, their lights illuminating the jungle around us. "Where are we going?" I yelled over the noise. "Anywhere but here," Mia shouted back. Her hands were steady on the wheel, her eyes focused on the road ahead. "We'll head inland, find another place to lay low." But as we rounded a bend, the road ahead lit up with the glare of headlights. A black SUV blocked the path, its engine idling ominously. Mia slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a halt. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the doors of the SUV opened, and 3 figures stepped out, their silhouettes backlit by the headlights. "Stay in the car," Mia said, her voice cold and steady as she reached for her gun. I grabbed her arm. "Mia, don't—" "They're here for me," she said, cutting me off. "I'll handle this." Before I could argue, she stepped out of the Jeep, her gun raised. I clutched Sophie tightly, my heart racing as I watched her confront the figures. One of them stepped forward, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Emily," he said, his voice calm and chillingly familiar. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" Mia didn't lower her gun. "Turn around. Walk away. Now." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, Emily. You know how this ends. Just come with us and no one gets hurt." Mia's hand tightened on the trigger. "You're lying." The man's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "So be it." And then, all hell broke loose. The world exploded into chaos. The first shot rang out, sharp and deafening in the stillness of the jungle night. Mia dove for cover behind the Jeep as the men opened fire, bullets ripping through the foliage and shattering the windshield. Sophie screamed, clinging to me as I threw myself over her, shielding her tiny body with my own. "Mia!" I shouted, panic surging through me. "What do we do?" "Stay down!" she yelled back, her voice hard with resolve. I peeked through the shattered glass just in time to see her lean out from behind the Jeep and return fire, her movements precise and controlled. 2 of the men scrambled for cover, but the leader held his ground, barking orders as the drones circled overhead, their searchlights piercing through the trees. Sophie was trembling in my arms, her small fingers clutching at my shirt. "Mommy," she cried, her voice breaking my heart. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "Mommy's going to protect us." Mia's voice cut through the gunfire. "Get to the back of the Jeep. There's a bag. Smoke grenades. Toss one toward them." Smoke grenades? I didn't even know she had those, but there was no time to hesitate. Keeping Sophie low, I crawled to the rear of the Jeep and rummaged through the bag. My fingers closed around a cool metal cylinder and I yanked it free. "How do I—" "Pull the pin and throw it," Mia shouted, ducking as another spray of bullets ricocheted off the Jeep. With shaking hands, I pulled the pin and hurled the grenade toward the men. It hit the ground with a thud, and a second later, thick plumes of white smoke began to billow out, obscuring their vision. Mia took advantage of the distraction, firing off 2 more shots. One of the men cried out and went down, clutching his leg. The leader cursed, retreating toward the SUV. "This isn't over, Emily," he shouted, his voice muffled by the smoke. "You can't run forever." Mia didn't respond, her focus entirely on getting us out of there. She slid back into the driver's seat, her face set in grim determination. "Hold on," she yelled as she threw the Jeep into reverse, tires screeching as we sped back the way we came. The jungle seemed to close in around us as we tore down the dirt road, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. Sophie was crying softly in my arms, and I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. I stroked her hair, murmuring reassurances I wasn't sure I believed. Mia's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "They'll be on us in minutes," she said, her voice tight. "We need to lose them." "How?" I asked, glancing nervously out the window. "There's nowhere to go." There's always somewhere, she muttered, slamming on the brakes as the road forked. She spun the wheel hard, taking the narrower path that veered sharply uphill. The Jeep bounced and jolted over the uneven terrain, the sound of pursuit vehicles growing louder behind us. Hold her tight, Mia said, her voice low and urgent. This is going to get rough. The road ended abruptly at the edge of a cliff. Below us, the ocean stretched out like an endless abyss, the waves crashing against the jagged rocks far below. Mia killed the engine, her breathing ragged as she surveyed the scene. We're trapped, I said, panic clawing at my chest. They're right behind us. Mia turned to me, her eyes blazing with resolve. Not trapped. We've got one last move. What are you talking about? I demanded, but she was already climbing out of the Jeep, pulling Sophie and me with her. There's a path, she said, pointing to a narrow trail that zigzagged down the cliffside. It leads to a cave. If we can make it there, we'll have cover. I stared at the trail, my stomach dropping. It was barely wide enough for one person, with nothing but a sheer drop to the rocks below on one side. You're kidding, right? Mia grabbed my arm, her grip firm. I'm not. Go, now. There was no time to argue. I scooped Sophie into my arms and stepped onto the trail, my legs shaking as I edged forward. Mia was right behind me, her gun in one hand as she kept an eye on the cliff above. Halfway down, the roar of engines grew deafening. I risked a glance back and saw the SUVs pulling up to the edge of the cliff. Men poured out, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. They've spotted us, I shouted. Mia didn't hesitate. She raised her gun and fired a warning shot, the sound echoing across the cliffside. Keep moving, she yelled. We reached the cave just as the first bullets ricocheted off the rocks around us. Mia shoved me and Sophie inside, then turned to face the trail, her gun raised. They won't follow us in here, she said, her voice steady. They'd be sitting ducks. What if they don't need to follow us? I asked, my chest heaving. What if they just wait us out? Mia met my gaze, her expression unreadable. Then we find another way. We always do. For a moment, the only sound was the distant crash of the waves and Sophie's quiet sniffles. I pulled her close, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But as long as Mia was standing there, unshaken and unyielding, I felt a spark of hope. We weren't done fighting yet. Inside the cave, the air was damp and cool, the faint scent of salt and earth mixing together. Sophie clung to me, her small body trembling as I knelt down to hold her close. Mia stood at the entrance, her silhouette sharp against the pale moonlight, her gun trained on the narrow trail we'd just descended. Every few seconds, she'd glance back, her expression focused, calculating. They won't risk a direct assault, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Too confined. They'll try to force us out instead. Force us out how? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mia turned, her eyes dark with the weight of experience. They'll block the exit, wait us out. Or worse, they might collapse the entrance. Panic surged through me. Then we're trapped. Not yet, she said firmly. These caves often connect to others, especially near the coast. We just have to find another way out before they close in. Sophie whimpered, burying her face in my chest. I'm scared, she whispered. I stroked her hair, my voice soft but shaky. It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's going to keep us safe. Mia crouched down beside us, her face softening as she looked at Sophie. Hey, baby, she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Sophie's ear. Remember what I told you about being brave? Sophie nodded hesitantly. Good, Mia said, her voice gentle but firm. I need you to be brave now, okay? We're going on a little adventure. Sophie sniffled but nodded again, her grip on her stuffed rabbit tightening. With Mia leading the way, we ventured deeper into the cave. The darkness was suffocating, the faint glow of our flashlight the only thing keeping it at bay. The walls were slick with moisture, and the uneven ground forced us to move slowly, every step deliberate. What if there's no way out? I asked quietly, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. There's always a way, Mia said, though her tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. We just have to find it. As we moved further in, the sound of the ocean grew louder, a steady roar that seemed to echo from all directions. It was both comforting and disorienting, a reminder that freedom was close, and yet still so far away. Behind us, the distant sound of voices and footsteps echoed faintly through the cave. I froze, my heart pounding. They're coming. Mia's jaw tightened. They're trying to flush us out. Keep moving. We pressed on, the passage narrowing until we had to squeeze through a tight gap in the rock. On the other side, the air felt fresher, and the roar of the ocean was louder than ever. I think we're close, Mia said, her voice low but urgent. Stay behind me. The passage opened up into a large cavern, the ceiling high above us and glittering faintly with moisture. At the far end, I could see a faint sliver of moonlight filtering through a crack in the rock. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was almost deafening now. There, Mia said, pointing to the crack. That's our exit. We hurried toward it, but as we reached the middle of the cavern, a voice echoed behind us. Stop right there. I spun around, my stomach dropping as the leader of the agents stepped into the cavern, his gun trained on Mia. Behind him, 2 more men emerged, their weapons drawn. Mia stepped in front of us, her own gun steady in her hands. You don't want to do this, she said coldly. The leader smirked. You've put up quite a fight, Emily, I'll give you that. But it's over. There's nowhere left to run. Mia's finger hovered over the trigger. You don't know me as well as you think. Oh, I know you, he said, his tone mocking. I know you'll do whatever it takes to protect your daughter. But let's be honest, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Put the weapon down and maybe I'll make this painless. Sophie whimpered behind me and I felt my chest tighten. I looked at Mia, silently pleading with her not to do anything reckless. But Mia didn't lower her weapon. Instead, she smiled. A cold, dangerous smile. You made one mistake. The leader raised an eyebrow. Oh? And what's that? Mia's gaze flicked to the cavern walls, and it was only then that I noticed the faint glint of something metallic embedded in the rock. You didn't account for the environment. Before I could process what was happening, Mia fired a single shot. Not at the agents, but at the cavern wall. The bullet struck one of the metallic veins, and the entire cavern seemed to tremble. What the? The leader started, but his words were drowned out by the deafening sound of rock shifting and collapsing. Run! Mia shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the crack in the wall. We bolted, the ground shaking beneath our feet as the cavern began to cave in. Behind us, the agents shouted in panic, their voices quickly swallowed by the sound of falling rock. We burst through the crack and stumbled onto a narrow beach, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. The waves crashed against the shore just a few feet away, and the sky above was filled with stars. Mia collapsed onto the sand, breathing heavily. I set Sophie down, and she immediately threw herself into Mia's arms, sobbing. It's okay, baby, Mia whispered, holding her close. It's over. I looked back at the cave, now partially collapsed. The agents were gone, buried beneath the rubble. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. But as I turned back to Mia, I saw the look in her eyes. A mixture of relief and determination. This wasn't the end. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. We need to keep moving, she said, her voice steady despite everything we'd just been through. They'll send more. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Then we keep running. Together, we turned toward the ocean, the horizon stretching out before us. Somewhere out there, freedom awaited. And we would find it, no matter what it took. The beach was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. Sophie had finally fallen asleep, cradled in my arms, her small body wrapped in Mia's jacket to keep her warm. The exhaustion of the night had caught up to her, but I couldn't rest. Not yet. My eyes kept darting to the horizon and back to Mia, who stood at the water's edge, staring out into the dark expanse of the ocean. She looked like a statue, her silhouette rigid against the faint glow of the moonlight. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her we were safe, but I knew better. Safety was a fleeting illusion now. "What's the plan?" I finally asked, my voice low to avoid waking Sophie. Mia didn't turn to look at me, her gaze fixed on the waves. "There's a fishing boat docked a few miles north of here. It belongs to an old contact of mine. If we can reach it, he can get us out of the country." I hesitated. "Out of the country? Mia, where are we even going?" "Somewhere they won't find us," she said, her tone clipped. "We don't have a choice." Her answer frustrated me, but I knew she was right. Still, a part of me wanted to push back, to demand a clearer explanation, but I swallowed it down. There wasn't time for questions. Not now. I walked over to her, careful not to jostle Sophie. "And after that? What happens after we're gone?" Mia finally looked at me, her expression softening. "We start over," she said simply. "New names, new lives. We disappear." I glanced back at the collapsed cave. The weight of what had happened, the danger we were still in, felt crushing. But Mia's resolve, her determination was unshakable. It was the only thing keeping me grounded. We started north along the shoreline, Mia leading the way. The sand was soft and cool beneath our feet, and the distant sound of the jungle behind us was a reminder that we were never truly alone. Every so often, Mia would stop, scanning the horizon or glancing back the way we came. "Do you think they'll come after us?" I asked quietly. "They always do," she said without hesitation. "But they'll need time to regroup after what happened in the cave. That gives us a head start." Sophie stirred in my arms, mumbling something in her sleep. I adjusted my grip, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She doesn't deserve this," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "None of us do." Mia stopped and turned to face me, her eyes filled with a rare vulnerability. "I know," she said softly, "but I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she's safe. Both of you." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Whatever secrets Mia was still keeping, whatever past she was running from, I knew one thing for certain. She would protect us with everything she had. Hours passed as we made our way along the beach, the moon dipping lower in the sky. The stars above were fading, replaced by the faintest hint of dawn on the horizon. Sophie had woken up briefly, groggy and confused, but Mia had reassured her with a quiet, soothing tone that calmed even me. Finally, as the first rays of sunlight touched the ocean, we saw it. A small, weathered fishing boat anchored just off the shore. A man stood near the waterline, smoking a cigarette. He was older, with a thick beard and sharp eyes that immediately focused on us as we approached. "Mia," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "You look like hell." "Nice to see you too, Leo," Mia said, her tone dry. "Is the boat ready?" He nodded, flicking the cigarette into the sand. "Engine's a bit temperamental, but it'll get you where you need to go. You're lucky I owe you." She didn't respond, just motioned for me to follow her toward the boat. Leo gave me a curious look, his gaze lingering on Sophie before he stepped aside to let us board. "Where are you headed?" he asked as he helped Mia secure the ropes. "Somewhere far," she said vaguely. "And quiet." He grunted. "Figures. You always had a knack for stirring up trouble." But there was no malice in his voice, only a strange mix of respect and concern. The boat rocked gently as we pulled away from the shore, the sound of the engine a low rumble beneath us. Sophie sat between Mia and me, her head resting on my lap as she stared out at the water with sleepy eyes. "Mommy?" she said softly, breaking the silence. "Yes, baby?" Mia replied, leaning down to meet her gaze. Are we going on another adventure? Mia hesitated, her eyes flicking to me before she smiled faintly. Yes, sweetheart. Another adventure. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes again, her breathing evening out as she drifted back to sleep. I reached out and took Mia's hand, squeezing it tightly. We'll be okay, I said, more to convince myself than her. Mia looked at me, her expression unreadable, and then nodded. Yeah, she said quietly. We will. As the coastline faded into the distance and the open sea stretched out before us, I felt a strange sense of calm. The past was behind us, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time, I believed that we might just have a chance. The sun was rising higher now, its golden light casting shimmering patterns across the ocean. For a moment, the world felt still, peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the last few days. Sophie slept soundly between us, and Mia's hand remained tightly clasped in mine as the fishing boat cut through the waves. But the calm didn't last. The faint whir of engines broke through the serenity, growing louder by the second. Mia froze, her body tensing as her sharp eyes scanned the horizon. When I followed her gaze, my stomach dropped. 2 black speedboats were closing in fast, cutting through the water like predators on the hunt. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. How did they find us so quickly? They must have tracked the boat, Mia said, her voice tight with fury. She turned to Leo, who had been steering from the helm. You said this boat was clean. It was, Leo snapped, though his expression was now one of panic. They must have tagged it without me knowing. Mia didn't waste time arguing. She grabbed her bag, pulling out a pistol and shoving it into her waistband. Then she turned to me, her eyes fierce and unyielding. Take Sophie, stay low. What about you? I asked, my voice breaking. We can't fight them, Mia. She looked at me, her expression softening for a brief moment. We don't have a choice. The first speedboat pulled alongside us, and the sharp crack of a gunshot split the air. Leo cursed, ducking behind the wheel as a bullet whizzed past his head. Mia fired back, her shots precise, forcing the men on the other boat to take cover. Stay with Sophie, she shouted at me, her voice raw with urgency. I crouched low, wrapping my arms protectively around Sophie's sleeping form. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. What's happening? She murmured, her voice small and frightened. It's okay, sweetheart, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Mommy's handling it. The second speedboat closed in, and this time a man jumped aboard our boat, his gun raised. Mia didn't hesitate. She fired twice, hitting him square in the chest. He crumpled to the deck, lifeless, but more were already climbing over the sides. Mia, I screamed as another man lunged at her. She fought him off, but the boat rocked violently, nearly throwing us all into the water. Leo, desperate, grabbed a flare gun and fired it at one of the approaching boats. The flare hit the fuel tank, and with a deafening explosion, the boat went up in flames. But the remaining speedboat was undeterred, its occupants swarming onto our vessel. One of them grabbed me by the arm, yanking me away from Sophie. I screamed, struggling against his grip, but he was too strong. Mia, I cried, my voice breaking. Mia's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with panic. She slammed the butt of her gun into the face of the man she was fighting and turned to face the one holding me. Let her go, she shouted, raising her weapon. The man smirked, his grip tightening on my arm. Drop the gun, Emily, or your girlfriend gets it. Mia hesitated, her chest heaving as she weighed her options. For a moment, I saw the conflict in her eyes. The desperation, the fury, the fear. But then her gaze flicked to Sophie, who was crying and calling for her. Slowly, Mia lowered her gun and let it drop to the deck. The man sneered. Smart choice. But before he could make another move, Leo, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, tackled him from behind, sending both of them crashing into the railing. The struggle was brief and brutal, and with a sickening crunch, the man went overboard, disappearing into the churning waves. Mia grabbed me, pulling me close as the last of the attackers retreated, realizing they were outmatched. The remaining speedboat sped away, disappearing over the horizon. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the waves and Sophie's quiet sobs. Mia knelt down, pulling Sophie into her arms and holding her tightly. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not really. Hours later, we reached a small, deserted island. The boat was too damaged to go much further, and Leo needed medical attention. As we helped him onto the shore, Mia pulled me aside. "This isn't sustainable," she said quietly, her voice heavy with guilt. "They're never going to stop coming." "What are you saying?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. She looked at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "You and Sophie can't keep running with me. It's too dangerous. You deserve a normal life." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We're not leaving you. We're in this together." She cupped my face in her hands, her touch gentle despite everything. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "But if I stay with you, they'll never stop hunting us. I can lead them away. Give you and Sophie a chance to disappear." "Mia, no," I begged, tears streaming down my face. There has to be another way. But her mind was made up. That night, as Sophie slept under the stars, Mia kissed her forehead, whispered something I couldn't hear, and walked back to the boat. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. I stood on the shore, holding Sophie close as the boat disappeared into the horizon. The weight of her sacrifice crushed me, but I knew she had done it for us. For Sophie. For me. Mia was gone, and the world felt emptier without her. But her love, fierce and unrelenting, would stay with me forever. And as I held Sophie tighter, I made a silent vow. I would keep her safe, no matter what.